Welcome to Human Histories.
God bless you all. God save the King.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hey everybody, I'm Riley Osborne. Welcome to another episode of Human Histories podcast. Today, we're back at the History Hangouts, and we're doing this because, frankly, we're having to reevaluate the way we do the show just to make sure that we can still be able to do this consistently. And we realized that the level of depth we were going into with the episodes isn't exactly sustainable weekly. So we're going to do a History Hangouts. We're going to sort of go through what we've learned and some misconceptions we had when we started this show, some things we've learned, and some things that we have also corrected within our own brain. So I hope you enjoy this show because it's much more of a coffee hour with the hosts and a bit more of an interactive episode where we get to sort of hang out, talk about history, talk about the things that we enjoy, but also give you an idea of where the show's going from here. So, as always, if you want to support the show, head over to Instagram, head over to the website, humanhistoriespodcast.com. On the website, you can subscribe to the show, which is super important. You can get our affiliate books, which is all the books that we use to research the show, and that helps support the show, and you can also donate. Another cool thing you can do is shoot us emails at questions@humanhistoriespodcast.com. Give us any questions you have, any points we might have missed, and also like cool stuff that you enjoy about the show. So that's pretty much all I have. Let's dive into this episode of History Hangouts because it's been about a month since we've done it. We've done a lot of learning since then. And, you know, I love these episodes. And we'll always do these episodes, but hopefully we're able to get back into a better rhythm with production.
Alrighty, how's it going, everybody? So, yeah, today, like Riley said, he covered it. We're going to talk about our misconceptions and our corrections about history, because, like, the biggest one, we'll hop right into it off the bat. I came into this podcast, and the bulk of the history I knew was the history of Rome, as I've said multiple times, and I was a super big Rome fanboy. I was 100% Team Rome, thought it was the coolest thing in the world, thought they were, like it kind of like a little boy thinking, like, if somebody asked you the question, like, if you could go back in time and fight in any military, but you wouldn't die, and then you could come back, what would you do? I would be like, Julius Caesar, bro. That's it. Let's go to Gaul. I'm down, right? But, you look back, and then you think that when you first hear about it, you're like, man, these guys were badass, right? But then you actually look into it a little bit more, and you're like, there's a meme of, I can't remember the show, but these guys are standing there, the guy's like, are we the baddies? Like, that's kind of how I feel when I fanboy about Rome. I'm like, these guys are kind of tyrants, right? They're, they're oppressive, they're taking over populations, they're not giving people a choice, there's rampant enslavement, and don't get me wrong, there's some certain elements that came in the later empire, like where, they integrate people into the society, they'd show clemency, they'd allow people more opportunities to become Roman citizens, etc. But the point being is, hearing about it firsthand, I thought, I looked at it as if it was Team Rome against all these barbarians, when, that's a retroactive approach. That's me looking back 2,000 years and applying my own idea of the story to that instance, or to that empire, as opposed to the tyrannical expansion of Rome and the oppression of all these small peoples, the Holocaust of the Celts, and etc. Like, it's not as all that it's cut out to be, right? And I guess that right off the bat, to give my theme personally for this episode, is just talking about how, we often look at history and we think. We apply our own idea of history to it. Like, wow, that's really cool. That's a cool story. This is badass. That's awesome. But we don't look at it as if we were there on the ground, boots on the ground, being that Gallic man, or that Roman man that's away from his family for 3 years, that's not getting his pay, that's going to fight in another civil war and killing his people. Like, it's very difficult to, it's very difficult to understand that history isn't. It's not this free flowing story, step A, step B, step C, where it's chaotic, it's messy. Oftentimes the guys we look at as the good guys are actually the bad guys, but they're the ones who wrote the history, so they look like the good guys. And yeah, I'm gonna toss this to Riley because I'm starting to ramble, and I think he has something to say. So,
well, it's a reminder that history is written by the victors. And I think that that's a very, very true statement. And then it becomes even more true when you look at cultures that had systems of record versus cultures that didn't have systems of record. So how could we possibly understand the cultures that didn't have systems of record? It's cool. Actually, just last night I watched this new movie called The Dig. And it's about this discovery that was made in Britain of a period, the Anglo-Saxons during the quote-unquote Dark Ages. And it's an incredibly important discovery where they discovered that during the Dark Ages, they were still intelligent people, right? And they weren't just like bumbling around, even though they didn't have structured societies, and they definitely did not compare to the Romans in their ability to have like a structured society. But they were by no means just like bumbling around in the Dark Ages. But what's important to note is that for me personally, like big things that I've realized, and I touched on this our last History Hangouts, is how humans, and this is going to sound awful, but humans are by no means inherently good to each other. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Humans are inherently bad to each other. And what I mean by that is we have always,
you're
throughout
gonna cause
history,
a philosophical debate with this one, this Hobbesian Rousseau argument. Oh, boy.
No, I'm just going to say, like, we have throughout history isolated into groups and then done what we've needed to do to survive within those groups. And you see this a lot nowadays with people obsessing about certain aspects of their culture or their identity and creating subcultures within our cultures and then vilifying each other about things. And it's ridiculous, right? Because as we see, there is no good or bad guys throughout history. Like you said, you know, we were like big Rome fanboys. I still 100% am. This was not foreign to me that the Romans were by no stretch of the imagination good guys. But you realize there's always two sides to every story, right?
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
that you need that to understand history. So that was big for me though. The big one, and let's pivot. Dude, the big one for me was the Persian Empire. I firmly believed that they were just this like horrible tyrannical regime that was going around and crushing everyone around them. Not at all the case.
No, the Persians were surprisingly, yeah, like we chat briefly before the episode about this and how like you look back at the Romans and the Greeks, and then you look at the Persians, and you think, thus far we've only covered Western history. We definitely will be covering more global history, but because of that fact, and because we're from the West, from Canada, we look at the Greeks and the Romans as the home team, right? So we have a bias towards them. We overlook their faults, and we magnify their successes. And so naturally, when we look at the Persians, we think, well, these guys are just, the Near East devils, just terrorizing everybody, trying to bring ruin to Greece. But when you dig a little deeper and you realize, oh, wait a minute, half the time they wouldn't even, they didn't march in and say, whereas the Romans would march into Gaul and be like, hey, this is our territory now, pay us taxes, give us food, or you know what's going to happen. Hey, thanks, guys, pleasure doing business, right? The Persians, they'd kind of march in and they'd say, hey, give us earth and water, show us your, subjugate towards us, right? Become our subjects, and, life's going to be pretty good for you. We're going to implement, we're going to give you a guy, we're going to give you our guy who's, just think of him like a supervisor. He's kind of just your neighbor, right? He's not here. He's not going to cause any trouble. If you guys have any problems with the neighborhood bully, just go to him. He'll help you out. But he's going to stick around. He's going to post up in your main city. He's going to deal with the tax collection. He's going to deal with your protection. He's going to deal with the communication from the empire. And, you guys can have your little religion. You can have your political system. You can have your little rituals, your festivals, etc. Hey, don't mind us. We're not here to cause a ruckus. We want your cooperation, right? And that's kind of how the Persians went about it. And that's that's why they had the satraps, right? Although that wasn't until later Persian, because if we go back to early Mesopotamian kind of stuff with Babylon, Persia, Assyria, it's pretty gnarly. it's bloodbaths, man. But point being, there was a lot more. It was like more of an open dialogue, more of like a, hey, you tell us what you need, and we'll see if you can accommodate you. We'll see if we can accommodate you within the confines of our empire. But we're not just going to drop nuclear bombs on you to send a message and then take the scorched earth anyway because, well, we're Persia. No, it was definitely more of a, if we can avoid war, why would we not, right? And this was mainly the case for their expansions. This wasn't necessarily the case for their neighbors like Babylon and Assyria, because that was irreconcilable, because those people, those tribes, those, I guess, I don't think of those cities, those empires, they've been warring for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's unlikely that there would have been that same degree of compromise, right? But point being, when it comes to expansionist policy, when you compare who we thought were the good guys, the Romans, to who we thought were the bad guys, the Persians definitely are in a more fair light.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was seeing, let's fast forward a couple thousand years, right? I was touching on European colonialism the other day. Just I got curious researching it. And you can identify these incredibly similar patterns between how they expanded, how the Romans expanded, how the Persians expanded, and these are all thousands of years apart. Each one of these expansionist cultures is thousands of years apart. They're almost doing it identically in a lot of ways. So how could you possibly say that if humans are doing things repeatedly throughout history in a very similar fashion from different cultures, different time frames, different religious ideologies, that to expand is not natural for human beings? And let's expand that even more. To expand is natural even for many animals, to expand the territory in which they operate. So it's really important that you never, oh my God, man, you see a lot of things about the vilification of people who have European ancestry, right? Based on, you were colonials or whatever. It's really important to remind yourself that throughout history, throughout all places in history, human beings have expanded, right? So yes, it's like this stuff is tough. It's tough to touch on. It's tough to read about. But do not ever vilify your neighbor because you've read something about history. If you focus on one aspect of history, you could spend your entire life researching it.
100%, yeah.
You could spend your entire life researching a battle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like there's guarantee you could find 10 scholars that just research the make and the process of making Bronze Age spear tips, right? Something that significant and that distilled. And you bring up a good point. And the thing that always strikes me is because this is what's hot right now in popular culture, but with the kind of, we talked a little bit about it in the Blackbeard episode, the Atlantic slave trade, right? I've seen things, and this is, I'm not saying this is in the general public. I'm not saying that I'm having somebody come up to me at work and shout this in my face as much as it's Twitter, it's YouTube, it's Instagram, and oftentimes those are the minority voices that speak the loudest. But I've seen things that confuse me, and one of those things might be something. I've seen people say that white people, for instance, created slavery, right? Well, how does that explain, how does that explain what was going on in China, 2,000 years ago? How does that explain what was going on in Africa even? How does that explain what was going on with the Romans, right? And the excuse, the thing I always say is, if that's the case, I should be going to Rome right now, and you as well, and being pissed at these people for, subjugating our ancestors. And now that's not to say that in the world that we live in, that steps shouldn't be taken to rectify the damage that was done. I am 100% on board for that, right? If people are dispossessed or some have less, I'm not saying, communism, but I'm saying let's try to have everybody be successful. But the point being, history is not, there's a recency bias with history, right? And I mentioned this, I believe, in actually the last history Hangouts episode, where if I stub my toe, it's going to be a lot more impactful to me than if Riley stubs his toe just yesterday, right? We both stubbed our toe. We both experienced that pain, but because it happened to me and it happened more recent, it's more important in my world, right? It takes up more of that mental capital. It's more of a pressing issue there's no blame to be had there, because it's incredibly difficult to take a step back and have that objectivity, especially when you don't take the time to, actually to look at the bigger picture, right? To look at the bigger picture of history. And yeah, like, and it brings me back to even thinking about the Huns episode, man. Like they enslaved and dominated tons of people, right? Was that something that they did for fun? No, it's kind of just their nature, right? They were warriors, right? That's the way the world was. And this actually touches on a really important point that I think talking about history is poignant here, and that's the fact that history for the last 100 years is not the same history as history was for every single year prior to that, right? Like, things are a lot different now. The world is like incomparably different now. We're all globally connected. I could hop on Gmail and shoot off an email to Thailand and have a conversation with some dude at a gym, right? I could get on a flight and go to Russia or Siberia, or and walk around this barren wilderness with people I have no idea about, right? Learn about their cultures. And that's an incredible thing. But with that also comes challenges, right? And part of that challenge is, now that everybody's connected and that we're all more on an equal playing field, well, then now there's scores to settle, right? In the imaginations of some people. And maybe not in the imaginations, like I said. Some people may be dispossessed, some may not. But like the Native Americans, like right when we talked about that with Tommy Prince, that's kind of a fair score that you want to settle. I'm all on board for that, right? But the point being is that it's not as cut and dry. There's so much nuance involved that gets lost the moment somebody has a what's the word I'm looking for? That somebody has an agenda to push, right?
Yeah, it's interesting when people have a historical agenda to push. You should almost always tune it out, because something that I keep learning about history is the more we learn, the less you know, right? The more you realize you don't actually know what you're talking about. So that's really important, because it helps humanize everything, and we're not saying that, like Ashton said, we'll never say that there's never a score to settle, but we'll always say, hey, listen, man, make sure you understand what you're actually talking about here, because the level of non-research people do nowadays is alarming. So just make sure you subscribe to the show, because we're going to be learning as we go, I think that's something that I enjoy about doing this show, though, especially, is because, we could go and just dive into historical areas that we're super comfortable with, right? We could just have made a show based on Roman history or based on Greek history or, whatever area that we've really dove into throughout our lives. But that wasn't interesting. That doesn't wake me up in the morning and make me want to write an episode about Catherine the Great. Spoiler alert, that's the next episode, right? But that there's so much that's happened, right? That for me to want to do a podcast and specifically talk about new topics, I would want to be researching and discovering new things, There's a billion podcasts about very specific topics. So it's tough to swallow that pill all the time and be incorrect all the time and be challenging your own preconceived notions. That's a hard thing to do, but it's what gets me up in the morning, right? It's what makes me curious to keep researching, to keep studying, to keep developing my historical knowledge base. Because it's crazy to me how people just get into their comfort zone and then they're good there, right? And their political ideology or their religious ideology or whatever it is. It's funny, I did a podcast with a guy who he's more religious, and he said he was very supportive of the idea of researching into other religions so that he could better understand his own. And I just found that to be a great idea, right? To research other cultures to better understand your own, right?
And not even to better understand your own, but simply for the sake of better understanding them, right? Like there's
yes, yeah.
That's part of for all its downfalls, that's one of the beautiful things about globalization, right? And that's one of the things I love most about Canada is like some of my best friends, like one of like I would consider him one of my best friends is, you know, he's a big Zulu guy, right? Like I yes, he started working with me about 2 years ago, and then we became tight. I was just lifting with him and went got breakfast with him yesterday, right? And like the fact that I can talk to him, and he's not like Zulu like his family was here, you know, 3 generations. No, he was born in Africa, right? In I believe it was Zimbabwe. This is my ignorance coming through. And he moved.
Well, if
here.
he's Zulu, it would have been Zimbabwe.
Yeah, see, that's what I was thinking. But like I said, my ignorance of Africa is, you know, it's astounding. But see, that's kind of the point of it all, right? Is that now that's something I now know, right? That, you know, Zulus are in Zimbabwe. And now I can learn about his culture. I can learn about what it was like for him growing up. I can learn about his life and, you know, the things he went through. And more than anything, that's a gift, right? Like that's a huge gift because that's something I never would have gotten to experience 50 years ago or 100 years ago, right? And I'm grateful for that fact. And I'm grateful for the mental repartee him and I have, right? Where I might say one thing, like, well, like for example, it's a very inflammatory topic right now, but like maybe we'll talk about policing in the United States or something along those lines, and maybe I might have had a misconception, and he can share with me his perspective, you know, and that changes mine. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't have had that.
Also, I was also just wrong there, by the way. It's southern Zimbabwe or northern South Africa is the Zulu region.
Okay, so he is from Zimbabwe then. So I'm pretty sure he is from Zimbabwe. So I guess it's southern Zimbabwe. Yeah. But yeah, the point being, there's that element of I would never have gotten to know that and that's kind of going to the point of what you're saying is people get comfortable in their echo chambers, right? And it's hard to look at your beliefs and say, well, my beliefs might be wrong here. You want to dig a hole. Like at a point you're going to need to like you can't make the world conform to your worldview. Your worldview kind of has to fit the world. You know what I mean? Like your worldview has to adapt to objective reality. You can't make objective reality fit to your worldview, right? And that's just one example of many where it's okay to say, hey, I'm wrong, right? You were talking about European settlers and colonialism earlier. When I was So I'm 25 now. So 10 years ago when I was 14, 15, and I was this edgy kid that was on the internet all the time, on these message boards and forums. And you know, I got all these really disgusting beliefs in my head about those things. And as I grew older, I realized how disgusting and awful those beliefs were, and I adapted and I changed, and now I can look back and realize how, you know, incorrect I was. And I'm not going to get into specifics because it's not important. And no, I wasn't talking about like, you know, eugenics or like Aryanism. That's not what I was getting at. But just the point being that through developing the ability to look at myself in the eyes and say, hey, you were wrong. But then the next words that come out of your mouth is, and that's okay. Because, you know, you get beat, you get better, right? And that's kind of where we're coming from here. And that you could see that all throughout the scope of history, where you like it's okay to adapt and remove those misconceptions, implement those corrections, and now your toolkit is that much stronger for not just the analysis of history, but almost the analysis of anything that comes your way, right? Because that's just really what we're talking about fundamentally is the development of critical thinking ability. You know what I mean? Like, I think that kind of sums it up a little bit, and applying that critical thinking lens to history.
And that lens through history research is in my opinion, one of the best areas that you can sort of flex it. Do you know what I mean? Because unlike science or unlike mathematics, which both require those as well, I mean, and any difficult field of research is going to have that sort of thinking that you're going to need to utilize. But I think that history, for me personally, is actually the most important when it comes to developing your view on humans, right? Your view on social interactions, your view on how we operate within a society nowadays, because you get a better understanding of everything that happened, you know? Like one of the craziest things that just continuously blows me away is how, you know, we just talked about the Zulus in Africa. The countries in Africa that are there today were like drawn up by a bunch of European guys. That's insane. That's insane, you know, to think about that. So whereas in Europe, it was people developed their own borders essentially, right? And then those borders have shifted and moved. But very, very limited, actually, how much they've moved. Even though they've conquered each other 1,000 times throughout history, they've sort of always been able to maintain these sort of structures that they have there. So, I mean, the world we have now is actually very young. And I think that that's something in history that just, oh, dude, my favorite thing is finding things from like 3,000 years ago. Like that really just like, that is the part of history that just like is so difficult for me to wrap my brain around. When you see these like intricate pieces of artwork or beautiful like metalworks from like thousands of years ago, and you're like, how is this possible? You know? But then you realize the Industrial Revolution is this very short window of human creation, and humans have intellectually still been on our level throughout all of history. And you can read that in books like Meditations, right? In Socrates' work and stuff like that. Like, you can see that they had the intellectual ability, they just didn't have the manufacturing ability to make podcast microphones and, you know, the internet, right? But that doesn't mean that they weren't intelligent human beings. And so here's a fun thing about history. When you're struggling with your beliefs, if you ever look at people in history as other, right? As, yeah, but that was back then. They didn't know anything. You're wrong. I saw this one thing the other day, and it was talking about the American Constitution. And this random guy, is like clowning the founding fathers of America because they were from 200 years ago. He's like, oh, well, they did this, that, and that. Like, how could we possibly see their beliefs as legitimate? Should we criticize those beliefs? Absolutely. 1,000,000%. There's tons of things that they did that were abhorrent compared to today's standards. But you're going to tell me, random guy, that you knew more than these men? No. These guys were leaders. They were leaders of massive militaries. They fought revolutionary wars in the case of some of them, right? There's so much that they would have had to do from a young age that they would have been well versed in understanding human beings, you know? So there's lessons that need to be taken from history, and they need to be taken seriously. If you read something from 2,000 years ago, that book that you're reading has as much relevance a lot of the time, not always, as a book that was written 20 years ago, intellectually. Like, genuinely, I believe that. You know, if you read, I'll go back to Meditations, but you know what? Here's a great one. The Art of War. You know, I was in the infantry, blah, blah, blah. But when I was studying military tactics, I studied that, obviously, for my work and just because I was really interested in it. I read The Art of War probably last year. I was blown away by how similar it was. If you've ever played Fallout and you see the war never changes, well, war tactics barely ever change too, because we've known this stuff forever. You know, this stuff is so simple. If you look at tanks nowadays, we use tanks almost identically to how they used cavalry back in 2,000 years ago. How the Romans used cavalry is essentially how we use tanks today. It's incredible. It's genuinely incredible. So erase that from your brain.
Yeah, and like to go back even further, just not even 1,000 years, like about 400,000 years ago in the cradle of Africa, when there was, you know, Neanderthals and Homo erectus and, you know, a couple of Homo florensis and Denisovans and all these different types of what were humans roaming around the planet. Humans, as we know them today, Homo sapiens, came out of Africa. 400,000 years ago. Those humans were slightly different than us, but something occurred. I think anthropologists estimate around probably about 140,000 years ago, that humans became anatomically similar to as they are today, meaning that physically they appeared similar, but their brains then became similar. 140,000 years ago, they were humans that had the same, you know, cognitive capabilities as you and I, just without the resources or the opportunity. Like we've been around for a long time, and like you see this, like Riley was alluding to with the jewelries, etc. What is all that? What is all that like? What is that a part of? Right, that's a part of hierarchy. That's a part of, you know, the people with the most jewelry in their burial. The chances are they were maybe the chieftain or the, you know, the mother of the chieftain, etc. Like there's always been those motivations throughout history. This is kind of tying all the way back to the colonialism and the expansions. Like, humans have always sought to climb those hierarchies, right? We've always sought to go higher and higher. And, that's, like Riley said, criticize it, realize where there's flaws, but understand that that is an inherent part of human nature, right? And at no point in history have we not sought to benefit ourselves and seek gain for ourselves, and at the expense of others. Doesn't mean it's right, it just means it is, right? And this kind of gets to the heart of this episode, is that we can hold, it's not doublethink, but we can hold two simultaneous beliefs and understand that hierarchies are important and they've existed for a very long time, while also realizing hierarchies are flawed and there's a place for improvement upon that we can then bring those two together and implement a system that's better and more beneficial for all, where, maybe there's less personal gain at Riley's expense. You know what I mean? It's interesting how, like Riley said, things just, they don't change as much as we like to think they change. But now, because we're basically just chimps with smartphones, we think that we're higher beings, right? We think that we're super enlightened, that we know better than everybody else. Like, we certainly have more access to information, without a doubt, right? But does access to information make you smart, right? Like, you could ramble off about all the different, quotes and TV shows and movies you've seen, and talk about those. That's information, right? That's not knowledge, right? There's a distinction to be made between the two. So to say that the war leaders, or Sun Tzu or Socrates, or George Washington, that those, or even going back to ancient China, going to Lao Tzu, right? The Tao Te Ching, to think that those things are, that they're, well, that's old, that's outdated, that's who cares about that, things are different, we've changed, times have changed. Well, the only thing you're displaying in that moment is your ignorance, right? Is your ignorance and your arrogance of, I know better, right? Well, and I know I'm kind of making a straw man here, I'm popping up this imaginative figure that's arguing with me, but it's something that I'm sure everybody listening has experienced, whether that's a family member or a friend or a coworker, somebody who might have a dogmatic belief that's ignorant, and they refuse to let go of it simply because they assume that they know best, right? Kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? And you could see the Dunning-Kruger effect applied throughout history as well, or sorry, when people look back at history as well, the I know a little bit about, it always comes back to this. I know a little bit about communism, therefore I could make the best communist society. It's like, I'm sure greater men than you have tried and failed, right? Or women. It's not as easy as it's meant to be. And as much as it might bring somebody to despair and think, oh, okay, well, there's nothing we can do about this. Like, well, I'll ask you, Riley. Like, what do you think's more? What do you think, from your perspective, is more important? Is realizing the failures and flaws in something, and like, what do you think occurs then? That, oh, I realized the failures and the flaws in this. Does that mean that you despair and say, well, now I'm on to the next system? Or do you, take the moment to say, okay, well, where does this succeed, right? Where is this good? Where is the good in this? What is the positive in this? What can I learn from this? How can I take that positives from this and move it into something better, right? And yeah, that's kind of, again, tying it in. Like, we have misconceptions about history that we have to challenge. We have to reconsider. But when in that reconsideration, we're able to take that newfound lens that we can observe things through and apply it to almost anything and everything and improve, right? We can take that, oh man, white people did some pretty terrible stuff during the colonial period. That doesn't mean that all white people are terrible, right? White people also did some pretty great stuff, right? So how can we find that middle ground where we acknowledge the terrible things that occurred, while also acknowledging the powerful advancements that occurred with different peoples, and not simply focus on one or the other, because you see that often where somebody says, well, these people did all this great stuff, well, these people did all this terrible stuff. Okay, well, you can acknowledge the terrible thing and also the positive thing. It's kind of like when you see people getting canceled, right? Like, if you have a musician that maybe something comes out about him, and like, can you still listen to that music if he did something terrible, right? Can you separate the art from the artist? Can you take the positives and acknowledge that there were negatives that coincided, and still be glad that you have the positive? I'm kind of getting a little rambly, but that's my thing. So,
I actually love that reference that you just made. So here's something, and if you're listening to this, this probably happened to you when you were like 15 or 16. Someone came up to you and showed you a picture of an art piece. It was a beautiful painting. And they said, hey, do you like this painting? Right? So let's see if you remember this. Hey, do you like this painting? And you go, yeah, man, that's a pretty good painting. Wow, that's actually very well done. Hitler painted it. Have you had that?
I've had similar things, yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times like different people have come up and be like, you know, like when I was a kid. And it's like, what does that have to do with anything? You're saying that people who were objectively evil didn't have the ability to do things? Mm-hmm. It's like, there's a lot of things that guy did that were quite intellectually brilliant. Like, I don't know, getting an entire nation behind him. Like, these things are, you have to be able to siphon lessons from everything that you can see, right? I saw this one thing, it was talking about how, you know, I'm going to get away from communism just 1 second, but it's the idea that, you know,
you're
Stalin
never getting away from communism.
Yeah, but Stalin and a lot of these guys were once young, ambitious, positive men. You know what I mean? They didn't just wake up one morning as these tyrannical, evil people. That's very, very, very rare. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting because we have to be able to objectively look in and take lessons from everywhere, right? And it's interesting, like, I always think that if you subscribe to one political ideology, you're sacrificing your intellectual freedom because you've decided you're on this team. So let's say, imagine if we did that with history and we just told the story from the Romans' perspective. You know, imagine if we'd done that Hun and Attila the Hun episode just from the Romans' perspective. What a silly episode that would have been. We would have been completely off, right? We would have been like, then the Huns came and there were these terrible, evil guys. You know, eventually we'll touch on the Vikings, and I'm sure we'll have to do the same thing because the Vikings didn't write about the Vikings. It was other people that wrote about the Vikings. So it's really tough. But when you can take emotion out of it and look 2,000 years ago, it's often much easier for us. Well, you have to be able to do that with every level of history. You have to be able to extract your emotional investment in it and really research the facts, really take it from every angle, really try to understand it from everywhere. And people have a tough time doing that, you know? I think that history is a great little area because very often people that enjoy history are much more nuanced with their understanding of things, which is awesome. And I think that's what's great about the community we're developing here. But when you go out into the world and you talk to people who only listen to like Cardi B all day or whatever, Please
don't sue us.
They often have as much emotional investment into their ideas as people that have really studied things. And so it's interesting to me, man, right? Like people get so invested in their ideologies, and I've never been invested in an ideology. You know what I mean? People have asked me, "Hey, what political party are you?" or blah blah blah. And you know, this podcast is and will always remain apolitical, but genuinely, I could never tell someone. I can't tell you that because then I've stopped listening. You know what I mean?
You know
why watch the debates? Why watch anything? Just be like, yeah, this is my guy. You know what I mean? Like, what a silly idea.
The worst part.
And why do that with history?
100%, I agree with you. And like that's, I think a good way to kind of circumvent that is like, I'm gonna get back to what you were saying, but when you were talking about Hitler for a minute, there's something I wanted to mention. I learned this in I believe it was a sociology class. It was either sociology or political science like 3 years ago. And we were talking about Hitler and we were talking about Obama and we were talking about, you know, all these different leaders and what do they have in common, right? Well, charisma, right? Are they a charismatic leader or not, right? So you can take an element of something that is inherently negative or not inherently, that is objectively negative, and say you can distill it, right? You can pull something out of that and say, what is interesting about this, right? Because like you said, obviously these people didn't get to the heights they did. Like they didn't just wake up and like walk outside and trip and fall and be like, whoa, now I'm the leader of Nazi Germany, right? Yeah. There was something about them, an element they had that led them to there. And there's a lot of fascination in that, and primarily for the sake of how can we avoid this, right? But if you just avoid the topic altogether and you blacklist it altogether, well, that's how you get Hitler 2.0 in 2039. You know what I mean? Like it's like that there's lessons to be learned from history, but you can't shy away from the dark and the evil and the nitty gritty, because that's most often where you'll find the nuggets, right? You don't find, yeah, sure, you can go pan gold in a stream, but you're only getting a little bit. You don't find the big deposits above ground. You find it when you go to the deep, dark places that no one has before, right? And coming back to the politics thing, I think it's funny. I used to be very active on Twitter and arguing with people, and I realized how I actually want to be sane and have my mental health. And one of the things I learned then was how you even like, if you're a conservative, they'll be like, oh, you're a fascist, right? If you're a liberal, they'll be like, oh, you're just a soy boy, right? Like stupid little name calling. But then if you're a centrist, and even I even like the term centrist, if you're somebody who is, you go with what makes sense and you don't confine yourself to one single political belief, now you're a fence sitter, right? It's like people always have to categorize you as something. It can't simply be that you're just Riley with your own beliefs, your own opinions, and maybe there's going to be a time when you have to vote and it's picking the lesser of two evils, because maybe candidate A has some things you really like, but a lot more you don't, and candidate B has a few things you don't like, but a lot more that you do, right? So if you vote for candidate B and he turns out to be a liberal, does that all of a sudden mean that your entire worldview is liberal? Most likely no. It means that you chose the lesser of two evils and what was best for you, right? And unless we had, like a proportional representation, or a representative democracy where we directly vote on all the issues at hand, I feel that's most likely going to be like that's going to be the case for a long time. Is that you're going to have to choose the person that might fit what's best for you, right? That doesn't mean that you need to be categorized and labeled and put into a box where now people can attack you, right? Because that's mainly the thing, right? Is if you're not, Riley, if you're not in a box, how can I then build a straw man to tear you down, right? If you're outside of this box, well, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to be nuanced? Well, chances are that if I'm trying to categorize you, I'm not a very nuanced person myself, and I have no business actually speaking on the topics at hand, because I'm not looking for progress. I'm looking for, a win. You know what I mean? And that's kind of like that's I feel like we've gotten off topic this podcast a little bit, but at the same time I don't, because that's when we talk about history through the lens, like you'll see people try to hijack history to get a win, right? A conversational and argumentative win. But history's not about a win, right? It's about understanding. It's about learning. It's about what can I take from this, right? What am I supposed to, like, am I going to argue with you and be like, yeah, bro, Hitler was awful, and if you think that Hitler was a charismatic dude, you're an idiot, right? Oh, now I just won, but I completely missed the point, right? I just shut my brain off from the potential that I had to learn, right? Because then maybe you see the next awful charismatic leader coming up through the ranks, and you start looking at it, and you're like, hey, I remember reading about people like this. Maybe there's a warning here, right? But instead, you're too focused on labeling people and tearing them down so that you can feel like you're winning, like you're doing something powerful or progressive, or you're reclaiming something, as opposed to just accepting and understanding. Like, I'd much rather sit down 100% every day of the week. I'd much rather sit down with somebody who is politically opposite from me, but does not label themselves, than somebody who is politically identical to me, but says, I'm a staunch conservative. And that's not me saying I'm a staunch conservative, but the point being, you're never getting anywhere with that person who might be more politically identical to you, because they don't want to go anywhere, right? But whereas with the person who maybe they're politically opposite, you can have a dialogue there, and maybe you'll change their mind, maybe they'll change yours, and if that occurs, it might be for the best, right?
Well, remember, it's very difficult to win an argument against a smart person, but it's impossible to win an argument against a stupid person.
Yeah. And that's human histories, everyone.
No, I mean, I think we'll have to title this episode like History and Politics or something like that, because we did get a bit off topic, but yeah. It's really important.
That's the coffee hour, bro.
Yeah, exactly, right? That's why we label it the way we do. But it's tough, because that's really important to make history matter today. Otherwise, what are we doing? Otherwise, we're just playing around in the mud. You know what I mean? Just like digging up old stuff and being like, cool, whatever. Like, if we're not learning about this and taking that into the modern era, right? Taking those lessons with us, what are you doing? You're literally just wasting your time. So maybe that's what we were trying to do this episode. I'm kind of comfortable to sort of end this one here. It's been almost an hour. How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel good. I think I do want to say one more thing in that, like, this one thing that comes to mind. I'm sure I'd like to do an episode covering this, maybe even a mini series at one point. But when you look at spirituality, right, and how that was pervasive throughout human history, but it's been snuffed out due to the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment. Well, that's another one of those things where you can look back and you can take the value from it, right? Like, you look at the Bible, right? And I highly doubt that the Bible is a step-by-step factual analysis of events that really occurred. But what it is it's allegorical. It teaches you lessons, right? It's, the eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. You know what I mean? Like, things like love thy neighbor. Like, even though there's a lot in there that you might disagree with, there's a lot in there that you can take that would benefit you greatly, right? Same thing goes with, the East in their what is dubbed mysticism, or like shamanistic elements of Africans and South Americans. Like, there's so much there that you could take if only you opened your mind and saw the value in different perspectives, right? Yeah, I think before Riley closes us out, that's all I have to say. So thank you for tuning in to this rambly episode of Human Histories. I'm Ashton Myers, and yeah, have a great day or great evening or whatever you're listening to this, everybody.
Yeah, guys, thanks a lot for listening to this show. If you do want to support the show, just so you know, we're going to be moving into a more bi-weekly. We'll be doing more in-depth episodes, and then the other bi-weekly we'll be doing shorter clips of history, and that's just so that we can maintain the ability to make this show. If you want to help support us make this show, a cool thing you can do for free is just give us a 5-star rating, hit the follow button, and listen. I mean, that's the best thing you can possibly do. If you really like the show, then share it on your social media or tell your friends about it. That's a great thing that you can do to help us keep building this audience. Another way you can support the show, if you would like to, and if you're curious about the books we buy, or you just want to donate to the show, you can go straight to humanhistoriespodcast.com. That has all the books that we use to research a lot of the shows and their affiliate links. So if you click through our website and buy, you can get those books. You can also get Audible. Yeah, you can get an Audible subscription. And if you get it through our affiliate link, you'll get, I think, 1 or 2 free books. And that helps us out as well. You can also just donate to the show on Patreon. And if you had something that you disagreed with, if you had something you agreed with, if you have a show topic that you would like to hear, shoot us an email at questions@humanhistoriespodcast.com. Next week, we're doing Catherine the Great. After that, we're going to be doing some other episodes, just brief little 15-minute stuff. And then we're going to hopefully get into some other cool topics in history. If you like the History Hangouts, eventually we'd love to get some people on the show with us so that we can sort of have other historians from different places and we can sort of talk history with them. That's going to be super cool as we develop. So those are the sort of 3 areas the show's going to go off into. If you've been listening, man, we just hit 1,000 subscribers on Instagram. We're about to hit 1,000 listens. We've actually passed 1,000 listens, but we just want to thank you guys. These first 10 episodes have definitely been a bit choppy, but we're learning as we go. And I think that we're improving. I think that we're sort of now getting back into a stride that hopefully will be a bit more consistent and be a bit more robust in the way we can do these episodes. But I just want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for hanging with us and listening. Last Monday we released the episode and had a whole bunch of listens within 5 hours, and it was just so cool to see that, right? So I just want to thank you guys. It really means a lot. I'm Riley Osborne with my co-host Ashton Myers. This was the Human Histories Podcast. Hopefully tune in next week.